Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Friday night and another W.R. Frady's Live Ghost Stories by the Fireside. Tonight's tales take us far away from the settled regions, and often those places we often like to visit. But before we get started, first, I'd like to bring some silence to what I'm doing. The music is Nox Arcana. And I always enjoy listening to their music this time of year. But let's begin. Oh. Hello there. Speaking of deep in the woods, my friend and companion, Poe. Some of you might recognize him from being on my shoulder in some of the pictures. Alas, he's not real, sadly. But I think it would have made a fine companion. What do you think? Alright, Poe. I'll set you back here. Ah, yes. Anyway, as I was stating, tonight's Live Ghost Stories by the Fireside is brought to you by the evanstonetower.com, soon the future home of all things W.R. Frady, with all fortune and everything working in my favor. It should be up and running within the next month or so. I always tell everyone the last quarter of 2021. There you'll be able to access the Legends of Lacey Road, Tales by the Fireside. You'll also be able to see things such as Darkhaven Manor, home of the vampire killer. And you'll also be able to see Balador and the Aldodorn, the Wise Oak. Be sure to stop in and visit the Cantankerous Cauldron, as Cantankerous Cauldron will be where you'll see the upcoming and pending projects for W.R. Frady and any of his compatriots. Be sure to stop in and check in on Wolf Moon Studios, which is my personal gallery of artwork, and we'll also have featured musicians and other artists, as well as writers and other projects outside of things that involve W.R. Frady. So the evanstonetower.com will be the home of W.R. Frady, all things W.R. Frady. Now, as it is now autumn, there are many of us that find ourselves wandering to places we normally don't wander. Usually, we find ourselves out in the woods. The woods. So many things, so many different things happen in the woods. It can be the source of great beauty and just unrelenting, just freedom and just getting out and just letting go and forgetting about the real world for a while. But then there comes that time of evening when the twilight sets in and the shadows stretch out and envelop the land, and it becomes much more sinister than originally would be. For example, how many of you like going to places like Nantahala or the Blue Ridge Parkway, or even just a lakeside in the night. Lakeside. This brings me to my first tale for the night, which comes from the Scary Stories series. Tonight's first story, The Dead Hand. The Dead Hand. See, there was this village out deep in the swamps. Now, all that surrounded it were murky black waters and the foamy sheets of peat that were common for the wetlands. Old gnarled blackened trees, which they called snags, dotted the landscape and pretty much held everything in a strange sense of not really monotony, but not really of anything dynamic or anything that would bring a sense of comfort to the normal traveler. But this was not about travelers, is it? You see, during the daytime, the people of this village had no problem. They'd be out, they'd work the peat, they'd do everything they needed to do. However, as night come in, the villagemen would hasten to finish their jobs and rush to their homes. For it was said that the night brought with it strange, unnameable creatures that wandered the brackish waters and traversed and haunted the eerie forest and wetlands where the snags were thick. And every once in a while it was said some of those creatures would venture into the village. That was what they said. However, there was one boy, Tommy, who really, he thought it was all nonsense. He was kind of the town's know-it-all, and as he was working the fields when darkness was approaching and things were getting a little too late, he was quick to poke fun at the fellow villagers and be like, "Oh no, there's one of those creatures now," and see and enjoy the laugh of seeing his friends jump and run. And this quickly grew old. So what would happen is one day the village men got together and said, "Look, you want to know, act like you know so much. How about you spend one night outside? One night. If you can spend one night outside and nothing happens, then hey, we'll understand. We're foolish about what we're looking for, what we're afraid of." Tommy felt he had nothing to lose, so sure, why not? And he's like, "So tomorrow night, I'll go. Matter of fact, I won't just stay. I'll go out by the old willow snag, and I will stay there." Well, he went on. The night following night came, and the villagemen, not wanting him to back out of his word, went to his home and ushered him to come on outside. His mother was inside begging him, pleading him, "Please, please don't go. Just admit you're wrong and just do this." "Mom, it's okay. Nothing's going to happen. I'm going to be fine. I'm taking the lantern. I'm going out by the willow snag, and I'll be back in the morning. No big." So he got out, and he went out met the villageman with a nod of his head and a big know-it-all smile, and began to hum his way as he made his way out through the village, into the woods, on down the trail, all the way out to the willow snag. Now, as he was going, some of the villagemen began to wonder if maybe they weren't quite so, he didn't have really anything to be afraid of, even though others could swear that they could see things moving in the shadows. Well, as he got out there, and he set his lantern down and began humming and things, most of the villagemen went back to Most of the villagemen went back to the village, but a few, just curious to want to know how it was going to play out, decided to stick around a little while longer. So they waited and they watched, and the shadows crept in, and the darkness enfolded around them like a blanket, and just all that could be seen was his light, his lantern, just casting a dancing glow along the waters, along the willow snag, and without warning, a wind gusted and hit the chimney and blew out the lantern, and everything was cast in pitch black. Well, the clouds rolled over the moon and finished blotting out the rest of the sky, and the men huddled around each other as they waited for the sky to come back open. And as the moon rolled out from behind the cloud once more, they could see Tommy with his back against the willow snag, shaking his head and putting his hands out in front of him as if to ward something back. And the clouds folded in around again. And when the clouds unfolded and the moonlight shone once more, he could be seen grasping one of the limbs of the old willow snag with his arm as if something was tugging it. And from what they could see, appeared to be a bodiless hand grasping his arm and tugging and pulling. And just before the clouds rolled over the moon once more, a sudden violent jerk pulled Tommy into the murky waters. And that was all the villagemen could tell what happened, because they scrambled back to the village as quickly as they could, some of them falling in murky holes and stuff along the way, but they tore out of there. The next morning, Tommy was nowhere to be found. And his mother was frantic, and they searched the area, and for weeks they didn't find him. But then one day, almost a month later, they were awakened to the sound of Tommy's mother screaming and crying as she come into the village. And the villagemen ran out to meet her, and she had bade them to follow her, and they followed her out to the old willow snag, and there was Tommy, clutched, white-knuckled, his hair gray, and just all sense of understanding seemed to be lost on him as he sputtered utter gibberish. One of his hands clung, white-knuckled and tight to the limb of the willow snag, and the other hand was nothing more than a ragged, bloody stump. It was said that the dead hand ripped it off. But the only person who really knows what happened that night was Tommy. And poor Tommy never spoke a sane word again. You see, the tales of things that go on in the woods aren't always the friendliest of fairy tales or the greatest of horrors. But sometimes are things that have been warned about for ages, and you just sometimes have to dare. It's like the phrase of an old Charlie Daniels Band song once said, "There's just some things in this world that just can't be explained." Now our next tale takes us deep into western North Carolina. Now, where do I mean deep into western North Carolina? I'm speaking of Nantahala, and more specifically, White Rock, or Whiteside Mountain, which borderlines another area everyone may be familiar with, which is the Devil's Courthouse. You see, all through the ages, we've read fairy tales, and we've read stories, and horror stories, and ghost stories about the witches of the wood, and the old hags that, like Hansel and Gretel, who had found the gingerbread house where the old hags waited for children that she would gobble up and eat. Well, this tale is about such a witch, such a hag, that is said to haunt western North Carolina. It comes from an old Cherokee legend. And the old hag's name was Spearfinger. You see, Spearfinger was not a hag like the witches we see and think of, which are old ladies who maybe rheumatism had set in and they're old and bent over and disfigured. No. Old stories and fairy tales and fairy lore speaks of supernatural hags that were born of another realm and have infringed upon our own. Spearfinger is such a hag, for it says she was born out of the very rocks of the Devil's Courthouse, and she hunted and haunted the area of Whiteside Mountain, that her skin was formed of a rock-like material so hard that no axe or spear or arrow could break through. But there was a singular recognizable feature about her she could never hide. And that was that her finger on her right hand was a long, knife-like or awl-like appendage that resembled a spear, giving her the name Spearfinger. And it was said that with that finger, she would kill men and tear out their liver and devour their liver. Now, according to Cherokee legend, Spearfinger would haunt the areas and was most fond of children. You will hear similar tales coming to Black Annis and other Baba Yaga and other foul hags. But Spearfinger, in her true form, was a hideous monstrosity of an old hag-looking feature with stony skin and this foul smell so decaying-like that a swarm of flies would always seem to be around where she was. However, she could change form. She could change form into rocks, which she had the power to bind rocks just by putting them together. It was said that some of the stones at the base of Whiteside Mountain were from where she was trying to form a bridge, and the thunder and lightning crashed and caused the bridge to collapse. Now, Spearfinger loved to hunt and haunt for food, especially where the children were sent to gather nuts and berries and fruits in the woods. She would like to haunt them regions, and she would dress herself, and she would change herself into the guise of an old grandmotherly woman, and she would wrap a hood and everything over her face to where they couldn't see her hideous stone-like teeth, which would give her away instantly. And when she would approach the village, there's no known Cherokee word for a grandmother, so it would become my child's son or my daughter's son or daughter. And she would wait till one would come, and she'd be like, "Let me dress your hair." And so she would dress the hair and pet and lull the little one to sleep. And once the little one was asleep, this is when she would strike, and a spear would go into her heart, kill her, and then she'd reach down and cut out the liver and devour the child's liver right there. And then when the child would become missing, and the village warriors race out to find her, they would find a pile of rocks about the size of a man near where the child would lay. And if they did happen to catch Spearfinger, they would begin firing their arrows at him and just watch helplessly as their arrows just bounced off of the stony skin. At which they would race back to the village, unable to do anything against this terror that stalked their area. Once, the villagers decided that there was only one way to take care of Spearfinger. They waited till the autumn of the year, when the leaves had fallen and the Cherokee would burn off the leaves that had fallen under the ground so that the children could go gather the nuts and acorns and things that they needed for the season to make breads and various foods that they would put away. And when they did, they knew this is one of her favorite times of year, for the cloud, smoke, and the wandering children were always left. Always, it was almost like a bait, because she would be drawn to that, and drawn to the prospect of her prey. Well, they dug a pit around the village and covered it with a grassy net and wheat and twigs. And as they did, they covered it, and they sent the kids out to do as they do and burnt the leaves, and then brought the kids back in early that day. And just as they were expecting, here come an old grandmotherly looking woman with her shawl over her face, her hood over her face, and trying to come into the village. And at first, the warriors were concerned. Maybe it was one of the women from the villages. And the chief urged him, said, no, if it's one of our own, she'll know about the pit. So let's just let it go. Sure enough, as the old elderly woman approached, she landed on the grassy pit and fell straight into the deep pit, like they would, and they began attacking it like they would some of the bigger game that they would capture at times. And they began firing, and sure enough, the arrows were bouncing off and breaking on the contact with her skin, and she took her hideous form. She began to crawl up the pit and began to try to stab at warriors with her fingers, especially her spear finger. And just eventually, one of them took aim, and as she started to reach out, she took aim and fired and shot straight into the right hand. And blood just spurted from the wound, and an eerie, ear-shattering scream just ripped out of the pit. And Spearfinger had been slain. And they buried Spearfinger under a cairn of rocks and kept him down, and they had never heard anything further from Spearfinger at that point. But it's still said that to this day, if you're hiking up around Whiteside Mountain and it's late November, early December, after the frosts had taken away the leaves, and you see the buzzing of flies hovering around a particular rock formation or near the side of the trail, be warned, Spearfinger may be nearby. Now, Spearfinger is an old Native American Cherokee legend, and you can look it up and see that this tale is one that It's, to be honest with you, it's kind of eerie. Because how often do we go hiking and just walking through the woods unaware of things that might be out there? This creature didn't attack at night, but in the broad of daylight. If you're not safe in the daylight, when can you be safe? Certainly not hiking out after dark. Which brings me to my final story for the night. Now, this story is one of my own, and comes from a collection I called A Bazaar of the Bazaar. Tales of the Strange and Unnatural. This story is the Headless Hiker. You see, Jeremy and Tina love to go twilight hiking. I say twilight hiking because it wasn't the hiking we do during the day, but because it's the hiking that is one does at around sunset and late into the night, as you can experience and see and kind of be open and free to do things that you normally would not be able to do in the light of day, such as gaze at the stars and feel the cool breeze as it rushes over your skin. Or to see or to experience the thrill of having only the glow of your lanterns or flashlights to guide your way in front of you. Well, Jeremy and Tina were on their way up through Boone, heading to the Blue Ridge Parkway. And they were going for a twilight hike on the Appalachian Trail. Now, they have hiked on many sections of the trail and other trails, and it was something they loved to do, especially in the twilight of the evening. Excuse me. Well, they got to the Blue Ridge Parkway, and they tried to remember which section they would go, so they took the road that would lead them to the Appalachian Trail on set. And they passed signs telling them of overlooks, which they would occasionally pull over and look and see the city lights like a great Christmas tree just spanning out through the valley below. Or they would go look and see the moon as it just blanketed the land, the countryside, with its silvery glow. And they would laugh, and they would carry on and listen to music and sing out loud, even if it was off tune. Just having a great time. Until finally they got to the trailhead they were wanting to meet. As they got out of the van, got out of their Blazer, they got their packs together, made sure their lanterns were fueled up, got all the necessary preparations in order. And then, after poking fun at one another about being too slow, or if you hadn't have done this, would have been here a little bit earlier, and giving that just teasing pokes at one another. Of course, they were the best of friends. But within a matter of minutes, Tina and Jeremy were on the trail, going up the mountainside, with the Blazer far behind them and only the glow of their lanterns illuminating the immediate surroundings. They were met by the sounds of a great horned owl off in the distance, a whippoorwill giving its nocturnal serenade on the hillside, and the sound of crickets just being the accompaniment of the evening. A gentle breeze rushed through the scattered leaves overhead, and just kind of gave a as it rattled some of the rattled some of the leaves and the sticks and limbs. Occasionally, you could see the flit of leaves just kind of passing through, almost like ghosts in the night. But they traveled on up ahead, and just And they talked and they enjoyed the sounds. And they looked up and could see the Big Dipper overhead and was pointing out different stars. A shooting star went by. And so on it went for maybe an hour or longer. And they enjoyed just in each other's company in the hike. Everything to this point was normal until they came up on a clearing. Now in this clearing there was a fallen log, and it looked like maybe it had been set up at some point as a rest point. But as they sat there and they decided to take a rest, get some hydration, eat a snack and things, and kind of rest up, and they would decide how far they were going to hike on up the trail before turning around and making their way back to the Bazaar, when they noticed that the sounds of the forest had mysteriously grown more distant, and that a heavy silence had fell over the area where they were sitting. Clouds had rolled over the moon and had blotted it out, making the forest even more dense and dark than usual. Even the wind, or that slight breeze which had greeted them on their way in, had died down, and a strange fog had begun to creep in, settle in over the area. Now, as they sat there, the fog kept continuing to get more and more dense, and they drank from their canteens, and they gnawed on granola bars and beef jerky, and just kind of refueled themselves. And before long, within a matter of minutes, the fog had gotten so thick that they could barely see one another in the lantern light. At that moment, the wind laughed through the trees, and I say laughed because it's what it sounded like, over the trees, through the trees. And they thought that was weird, as the breeze that they had heard hadn't even bothered to budge this eerie fog that had settled in. In fact, they didn't even feel the breeze themselves, they just heard it. As they was getting their packs back on and getting ready to move out, they heard heavy footsteps coming from the trail ahead. Now, they could hear this because the rest of the forest had grown completely dead silent. And they could hear that someone approached, but in the depths of the fog they couldn't see it, except until they could see the vague form of somebody taking shape as they got nearer in the lamplight. And then, as the figure come into view, they took a gasp of shock and horror as they realized what stood before them. For what stood before them was a man, or at least what resembled a man. For the boots it wore were similar, seemed to be old combat boots, and weathered blue jeans, and a flannel shirt so old and worn that the colors were completely unrecognizable. But more unrecognizable was the person itself, for where there should have been a head, there was none. And again that hollow laugh, which they had thought was the wind, had come forth. "This trail is mine," it said. A voice sounded out that sounded like the rasp of dry leaves. And not all thoughts of the hiking ahead were gone, as both screamed in terror and grabbed the lantern and began running back down the trail. And as they went, they would look back to see if they could see the thing behind them. They thought maybe that they had lost it when on the trail ahead, when they raised up a lantern to see where they were going, they were met by a head piked, a disembodied head piked on a tree limb right in front of them, its face locked in an eternal scream. And they startled back, and again the laughter came, and they could see the jaw mechanically just moving with the laughter. And Tina stopped, and they turned around and looked back, and just as she started to grab Jeremy, the headless hiker, grabbed him from behind. And she watched in his horror as his skin folded away from his figure like wet candle wax melting from next to a hot flame. And as she screamed and watched what remained of her friend drop at her feet, she took off running once more and just tore down through there, her chest screaming for air as she fought against her will of survival just to get away from that horrid thing that they had run into. As it was approaching, getting closer and closer to the end of the trail, she saw another set of hikers coming toward her with their lanterns going bright. And she started flagging them, warning them, "No, go back. There's something on the trail ahead. There's something up ahead. It killed my partner. Get back." And she tripped and ran right through them and stumbled. And the two hikers turned with their lanterns and looked at her and said, Go now, or forever be trapped here as we are. Go!" And so she, taking their advice, she took up and she ran and just completely got. And as she turned around to see if the other hikers were there was the headless hiker coming in right behind her. And she got to the thing, got her key out before she could get to the blazer, unlocked it, jumped in, and not even taking a moment to cry for her lost friend, just turned it on, threw it in reverse, and sped back down the Blue Ridge Parkway, putting as much distance as she could between her and the headless hiker. Well, a year passed, and the events of that night haunted Tina. And the sight, and it played over and over in her nightmares, her watching the demise of her dear friend. And she knew that the only way that she was ever going to lay it to rest was to go back and visit that place one last time. Go visit that spot one last time. And so she took a bouquet of flowers in respect for her friends and wrote a note in it, hoping that if his spirits were among those trapped on the trail, that he would read her note and her apology and that she had missed him. And so she drove back up that evening and parked. And the clouds had rolled over the moon and a fog had set in. And as she went out and she laid the bouquet there at the signpost that marked the head of the Appalachian Trail, she said a silent elegy for her friend. And then she got up and she turned to get out of there as quickly as she could and turned and ran right into the headless hiker. there are things in the middle of them woods that'll make a strong man die of fright. Again, from Charlie Daniels' band, The Legend of Woolly Swamp. I hope you enjoyed these tales tonight. And whenever you're in the deep woods, I hope you keep an eye and your wits about you. For you never know what's out in the middle of those woods. Yes, there are animals. Yes, there could be other people. But then there could be things that man was never meant to know or come across. I thank you once again for joining me here on Friday night for another episode of Live Ghost Stories by the Fireside. Thank my good little buddy Poe for joining me. And again, I'd like to give a few shout outs. First of all, thank you Kevin Carver for joining me each and every night this year. Thank you very much for joining. Kevin Carver is a good old friend of mine from high school, and I appreciate every bit of the support he's been showing. To each and every one of you who have joined in at some point or another, thank you. I'd also like to give a great thanks to my friends Chad Williamson of Moonrunner 83, who's got a new album coming out late this year. I also would like to give a shout out to my good friend and synthwave artist Megan McDuffie, who's just released her Atari soundtrack. Awesome job. I look forward to being able to hear it, and definitely love listening to the music. If you get a chance, Megan McDuffie, give her a good listen to. She's got a great set of music, different albums. She's done a lot of work with Moonrunner 83, Clayton Cell Dweller, and is a part of the Fixed Neon artists, along with Moonrunner 83, my good friend Jared Nicklin. And I really thank each and every one of you for the support and love you guys give me. My good friends at Groove Studios in Slovakia, thank you for being good friends and being a great support. I also would like to give a shout out to the Dusk series. Seasons 1 through 3 are up on Avail TV and on YouTube. I make cameo appearances in season 3, but I have good friends and family that are part of seasons 1 and 2. Definitely give them a listen to. Season 4 is getting ready to go into production, and I will be in season 4. I also would like to thank my good friends Argon Wave, who are usually always right there, just jamming with me. They always know me as Terry Bogard and always sending me my wolf symbols. I appreciate it, guys. I also would like to give a good shout out to The Devil's Daughter, which will be premiering at Golden Ticket Cinema in Lenoir on October 30th. There'll be a premiere event with the actors, including myself, being there. That not only for the movie, but for meet and greet and quick Q&A, and just come out. All proceeds of the tickets being sold for The Devil's Daughter is going to Gracious Hands, for a Center for Domestic Violence, which helps relocate women and children who are victims of domestic violence. So it's all going to a phenomenal cause and making the world better for people who need their world to be better and giving them a new chance at life. Also, want to give a good shout out to my good friends Clint and everyone who involved that just continually support me and have made me the person I am today. I would like to thank each and every one of you. I'd like to thank each and all of you my friends, family, fans, both on Facebook, Instagram, and even those who know me from Radio Rivendell and such. Just thank you for making this possible. Without you guys, I wouldn't be here. My stories would have no one to listen to them. And you guys don't realize how much I appreciate being able to share my stories with you, each and every one of you. I will, an announcement I'd like to make is that I will have Legends of Lacey Road Volume 1 going up for sale on YouTube, not YouTube, but on Amazon, which I will, so be prepared for, and keep an eye out for announcements following that. I may do my Bazaar of the Bazaar, where the Headless Hiker came from. It's one of my oldest collection of ghost stories that and scary tales that from many, many moons ago. And, you know, again, the EbbenStoneTower.com, which is the home for all things W.R. Frady, is under construction and is set to be up and live by the last quarter of 2021. And on it, like I said, the Wise Oak, which is the home for all things of Balador and the Island of Igraine, Darkhaven Manor, the home of the Vampire Killer tales. The Ebbenstone Tower itself, which is just all of my collected stories and things that have nothing to do with any of my particular settings. I'm trying to remember how, and some of them that are on there, there's many, many more. Like I said, Legends of Lacey Road will be there. Wolf Moon Studios, which is the art gallery and other projects and featured artists and musicians. So you'll have that. The Cantankerous Cauldron, which will be the place where all the pending ideas are taking place, and you can kind of keep up with what's brewing in the world of W.R. Frady. So yes, again, thank you. Thank each and every one of you. And with autumn rolling in, many of you are going to go walking in the woods to see the fall colors, to hike and just go to the waterfalls and explore the natural beauty. If you do happen to get caught into these dark places, into these places after dark, keep your wits about you, for you never know just who or what you might run into. I hope you each and every one have a wonderful evening and a wonderful weekend. And I will see you next week, maybe with a guest, maybe not, here again by the Fireside for live ghost stories. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful evening.